After 7 years of sacrifice, my husband took me to court, but I was ready. After 7 brutal years of juggling 3 different jobs to bankroll my husband's big tech dreams, he repaid me by dragging me to court. Pushed along by his overbearing mother, he stood there in front of everyone, judges, lawyers, strangers, and said with a smug little grin, "She's just here for the money." "She never even had a real job," he added with a chuckle, like my whole life was a punchline. But when I stood up, knees shaking but voice solid as steel, I looked that judge dead in the eye and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to present this prenup, signed in Paris." That shut the room up real quick. You could hear a pin drop. Felix's grin melted clean off his face, turning ghost white as the memory of that drunken night in Montmartre slapped him sober 7 years too damn late. But hang tight. Before I tell you how the courtroom showdown ended, let me roll it back to when it all started. I was 28, sharp as hell, and flying high at Meridian Financial. My name is Emily, and back then, I was the one with the corner office and a paycheck that made people do double takes. My boss had just tapped me for the exec track, the big leagues. "You're going places, Matthews," he told me that morning. "Most analysts don't see this chance before 30. That night, I hit up a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend, and that's where I met Felix Reynolds. He had this spark in his eye and a whole room hanging on his every word, rambling about some tech startup that changed the way small businesses handle inventory. The dude talked about algorithms and scalability like it was poetry. I won't lie, I was hooked. Felix had stars in his eyes when he talked about his big idea. Some groundbreaking system to overhaul how small businesses manage inventory. The way he laid out the algorithms, the scalability, the untapped market, it was like watching someone map out the future. But then, on the balcony later that night, the sparkle dulled a bit. "The problem is capital," he admitted, voice lower now. "No one wants to bet on something unproven." 3 months into our high-speed, all-consuming romance, his old beat-up laptop, the one holding all his code, just gave out. No backup, no savings to replace it. So I bought him a new one. No hesitation. "You're investing in our future," he whispered, kissing me like I'd just saved the world. "I'll repay you tenfold." By 6 months in, Felix ditched his IT consulting gig to go all in on the startup. His bank account? Basically a tumbleweed. Investors? More talk than action. So I picked up the slack. First, it was our groceries. Then the rent. Then his car payment. "It's just for now," he'd say over soggy dollar ramen. "Once we land seed funding, everything changes." A year later, we were engaged, and I hit a crossroads. Meridian offered to ship me to London for a 1-year exec fast-track program. That was my golden ticket up the corporate ladder. "I'd get it if you left," he said, but the droop in his shoulders, that told the real story. So I stayed. 2 weeks later, they restructured me out of my job, corporate speak for getting out. I sobbed into Felix's chest, and he held me, whispering, "Maybe it's a sign. Now you can help build this thing with me." That help turned into a slow, brutal spiral. First, I grabbed an admin job that paid half of what I used to make. Still not enough, so I worked weekends at a greasy diner in Riverbend. When even that didn't cut it, I signed up to drive rideshare after my day shifts. Sometimes my old coworkers would end up in the back seat, awkward and surprised. "Emily, weren't you on the exec track?" I'd paste on a smile, tell them I was supporting my fiancé's dream. "It's an investment in our future," I'd say. They'd nod, say something nice, but I saw the pity in their eyes. Meanwhile, Felix practically became a ghost in our tiny apartment, working 18-hour marathons. He'd only emerge for coffee or a microwave burrito. On the rare nights we were both home, he'd go on and on about new breakthroughs, funding possibilities, while I soaked my throbbing feet and calculated how to pay rent. Again. We got married in a courthouse. Just me, Felix, and Rose, his mother. My family didn't show. They didn't get why I'd torched a career for a guy chasing a pipe dream. "You're throwing your life away," my dad had said. "You've worked too hard for this," my sister warned. Rose hated me from day one. That tight smile of hers said it all. Felix married beneath him. "My son needs someone who understands his genius," she'd say, while eyeing my diner apron like it personally offended her. "Someone who shares his ambition." Then, out of nowhere, Felix announced we were going to Paris. Said he'd landed a meeting with a French investor who was even covering the trip. "We deserve this break," Felix kept saying, over and over. Like repeating it would make the numbers in our bank account magically change. I knew we couldn't afford a damn croissant, let alone a flight to Paris. But he'd somehow convinced a French investor to fund the trip. So I went. And Paris, it was breathtaking, yeah, but lonely. Felix spent his days holed up in pitch meetings, chasing funding like a dog after a bone. I spent mine wandering the city solo, nursing espresso, and wondering what the hell I was doing with my life. On our third night, his big investor meeting was a hit. We went out to celebrate, and Felix downed champagne like it was water. By the time we got back to the hotel, he was snoring in a wine coma. That night, as I stared at him, passed out in the fancy bed we couldn't afford, I made a decision. I had sacrificed too damn much. My career, my pride, my energy, my time, 3 jobs at once for years. If he wasn't going to protect me, I'd protect myself. A business-savvy American expat I'd met at a cafe had casually mentioned her friend, a lawyer who specialized in international contracts. The next morning, while Felix nursed his hangover with aspirin and overpriced hotel coffee, I met with Monsieur Beaumont. We put together a prenup that spelled it all out. Every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice I had made. It granted me 49% ownership in Felix's beloved company. We even included a clause for sweat equity, a fancy way to say I'd been breaking my back while he coded. That night, with more bubbly flowing and Felix still riding the high from his investor win, I handed him the contract, told him the French investor wanted signed paperwork showing internal investment. He didn't even read it, just scribbled his signature like he was signing an autograph. "To our future," he toasted, absolutely clueless. Back home, nothing changed. I kept grinding, he kept coding. Slowly, so slowly, his company started gaining traction. One tiny investor, a beta test. Then finally, after 3 freaking years, Restock Solutions got its first paying client. Business was looking up, but we weren't. Felix started crashing at the office for deadlines, which somehow always lined up with late-night texts and suspicious silences. Then came Tess, his new assistant. She looked like she stepped out of a Vogue ad and had a resume thinner than a breath mint. And Rose, she basically moved in at the office. "Client relations," she claimed. But anytime I asked about anything, budgets, strategy, even a damn wall color, she'd cut me off with that syrupy tone, "You wouldn't understand, sweetheart. Leave it to the pros." By year 5, I was still juggling multiple jobs like some unpaid intern, while Felix claimed every cent had to go back into the business. No upgrades, no relief. Our apartment was still cramped. Our car still wheezed on cold mornings. "Short-term sacrifices for long-term gain," he'd say, dressed in his new tailored shirt, checking the time on a shiny new watch. I'd nod, wearing my thrift store blouse, heading to job number 2. By the 7th year, we were unrecognizable. The financial powerhouse and visionary techie, gone, replaced by a sleep-deprived workhorse and a stranger who now called himself Senior Executive Officer at networking events. He'd become this polished, cold version of himself. And me? I'd become invisible. Everything I gave, everything I held up, faded into the background, like I was never even there. His success had erased me. Never in my wildest dreams did I think the final chapter of our story would open inside a courtroom, with Felix wearing that smug, ice-cold smirk and saying the words that gutted me right there in front of everyone. She never even worked a real job. Everything cracked that day. It was a Tuesday in March. I remember because I had just finished a grueling double shift at the diner. My feet were numb, my hair smelled like fryer grease, and I was about 2 seconds from crashing when my phone buzzed. It was Felix. His voice was buzzing with adrenaline. "We got it, Emily. 8 million. Anderson Partners is backing us. We're scaling immediately." I sat down on the curb outside, still in my apron, brain scrambling to make sense of it. 7 years of broken promises, and now it was real. "Does this mean I can finally quit one of my jobs?" I asked, hope fluttering for the first time in what felt like forever. He paused. "Let's not jump the gun. We need to reinvest. Maximize growth. But soon, I promise." Soon, huh? 2 weeks later, Restock Solutions moved out of our dusty spare room and into a slick office space in Westbrook Business Park. Felix hired developers, sales reps, and marketing people. Suddenly, he was rocking tailored suits and name-dropping steakhouses I couldn't even afford to park outside of. Then came Tess. Over one of our now rare dinners together, he announced, "She's the best executive assistant in the industry. She's exactly what I need to keep things running tight." Tess Morgan, 27, polished, Stanford alum, perfect chestnut hair, and pantsuits like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes. I first met her at the company's office warming party. She gave me a once-over, polite but ice cold. "Oh, you're Felix's wife? Fascinating." Then with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, she added, "He rarely brings up his personal life at the office." The words landed like a slap. I was wearing my best dress, 3 years old, clearance rack special. I had stayed up until 2 a.m. after working both jobs to make a tray of appetizers. "Emily likes to keep things simple," Felix chimed in, grabbing the tray like I was some hired help. "Tess, could you show her where to set up the food? I need to greet the investors." And just like that, I was the wife. Introduced for 5 seconds, then shoved into the background while Felix played Mr. Visionary. Rose swept in, fashionably late, all drama and pearls. She wrapped Felix in a big theatrical hug, then turned to survey the room with obvious pride. "Darling, this is just the beginning," she gushed, smoothing out his tie. "I always knew you were meant for greatness." She tossed me a glance. Not a word, just a clipped nod. "Emily, the cheese plate looks sad. Be a dear." I bit my tongue, reminded myself it was his moment. But that night, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I saw exactly where I stood, on the outside of a world I helped build. I felt like I was staring into someone else's life through a window. Mine, but without me in it. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Felix brought in a new CFO, even though I'd been managing the books since day one, and, all right, I had a finance degree. When I questioned it, he barely looked up. "We need someone with enterprise-level experience now," he said, waving me off. "You've done your best, Emily, but we're in the big leagues." Just like that, years of sweat and spreadsheets were wiped off the board. Any financial input I offered got met with fake smiles or brushed aside like I was some overzealous intern. And then Rose, his mother, started showing up at the office like she owned the place. She sat in on meetings, threw out opinions on marketing, even commented on the damn paint color. When I asked why she was so involved, Felix shrugged. "My mother has excellent taste. She knows people. Her connections are opening doors." Funny thing, those doors never seemed to open for me. One afternoon, I decided to surprise him with lunch. I stepped into the office lobby and froze. The place had been completely transformed. The walls were now lined with glossy framed photos of his journey. Felix pitching to investors, signing deals, cutting ribbons, winning awards. 7 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and not a single photo of me. "Can I help you?" came a voice. Tess, cool and polite, walking out of her glass office like she didn't already know who I was. "I'm here to see my husband," I replied, suddenly feeling like I needed an access badge. "He's in meetings all afternoon," she said, flashing a professional smile. "You should have called first." Back at home, Felix started working later and later. At first, he'd apologize. Then it turned into clipped answers. Then, silence. "Building a company takes sacrifice, Emily. You get that, right?" I did get it. I'd been living it for 7 freaking years. One night, I passed out on the couch waiting for him. His phone, left behind in his morning rush, lit up with a message. "Tess, working late again tonight. Ordered dinner from Mizan. Your favorite booth in the back." I stared at the screen, my stomach nodding. Then I scrolled. Message after message. Inside jokes, flirty compliments, midnight check-ins. Things no assistant needed to say. When I confronted him, his denial was instant. Too instant. "She's just being efficient. It's her job to anticipate my needs." Midnight texts about how hot he looked in a suit. "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "This is why I can't talk business with you. You're too emotional, too small-minded." The same man who once praised my financial insight now spoke to me like I was some irrational child. At first, it was small. The eye rolls, the condescension. But then came the real slaps. My birthday? Ignored. Our anniversary? Just another line in his calendar. Then came the magazine feature. 4 glossy pages in a regional business publication celebrating Felix and his startup success. Not one mention of me. My name didn't appear once. Not a single damn word. 4 full pages in that glossy business spread, all praising Felix's solo journey to success. And there they were, Felix, Tess, and Rose,
posing in their pristine office like they built it out of nothing but brilliance and ambition. "You talked to them for 3 hours," I said, staring at the magazine. "You couldn't even mention me once?" He didn't even look up from his laptop, just shrugged. It wasn't relevant to the business narrative. 7 years of my life. Erased. Like I never existed. The final nail? I borrowed his laptop one night to pay our bills. Because, yes, even with all his new money, I was still handling that part. Minimized in the corner was a document. A signed lease for a luxury high-rise apartment downtown. Effective immediately. That night, Felix didn't come home until 3 a.m. When he did, he reeked of some expensive floral perfume and fed me a bunch of clumsy, practiced lines. The next morning, he didn't even pretend anymore. "This isn't working," he said, stone-faced. "We want different things. Me and Tess, right?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. 2 days later, he was gone. 3 weeks after that, I was tying on my apron at the diner when the divorce papers arrived. Grounds are controversial differences. The offer? A generous one-time payout that barely added up to 6 months of his current salary. When I called him in disbelief, it wasn't Felix who picked up. It was Rose. "He's very busy," she said, with a voice so smug I could hear the smirk. "The lawyers will handle everything. Frankly, dear, you should be grateful. What did you really contribute, besides being a temporary support system?" I didn't respond. I just hung up. But I knew exactly what I had contributed. And I also knew exactly where the receipts were. The prenup. From Paris. Still sealed. Still tucked inside my old college finance textbook. The one book Felix would never touch. It felt heavy in my hands when I pulled it out. Like holding proof of all the years he tried to erase. I sat there for a moment, unsure. Was I really ready to go to war with the man I once gave everything to, loved so blindly? Then my phone buzzed. It was my diner manager. "Can you cover tonight?" Of course, because while Felix was playing CEO in a penthouse, I was still scraping for hours. That was it. Before the lawyers, before the courtroom, before the scorched earth, I decided he deserved one last chance to look me in the eye. So that evening, just after 6, I walked into Restock Solutions. Most of the staff had already left. The receptionist, someone I'd never seen, looked startled. "I'm sorry, we're closed for appointments. I'm here to see Felix Reynolds. I'm his wife." Her eyes flicked wide. "Oh, I didn't know. Let me check if he's available." 5 minutes later, they led me into his shiny corner office, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking half the damn city. Felix sat behind a massive desk, all polished wood and power moves, looking like a CEO straight out of Forbes. He didn't even stand. "This is unexpected," he said, voice clipped, eyes unreadable. "I thought we agreed everything goes through our attorneys." "No," I replied, staying on my feet, while he motioned lazily towards a chair. "You decided that. I never agreed to anything." I wasn't here to sit. I was here to look him in the face. One last time.
I want to hear it from you, Felix. After everything, after every job I worked, every night I came home aching while you chased your dream. Here we go, he muttered, already annoyed, checking his Rolex. The sacrifices speech again. Emily, no one forced you to take those jobs. I stepped closer. You didn't force me, but you sure didn't stop me from paying for your life. He scoffed. 7 years. I gave you a shot at something great, and now I'm compensating you for that time? The settlement offer is more than generous. I laughed, cold and bitter. 6 months of your current salary for 7 years of my life? That's your idea of generous? He leaned forward now, voice sharp. What exactly do you think you're owed? You didn't write code. You didn't pitch to investors. You didn't build relationships. No, I said, voice tightening. I kept a roof over our heads. I paid for your prototypes, your equipment, your stupid conference trips. That was me. Every inch of the foundation, you built it on my back. He waved it off like I was an annoying client. That's when it hit me. The man I married didn't exist. Maybe he never had. I stared straight at him. Are you sleeping with Tess? His pause was tiny, but it said everything. My personal life is no longer your concern, he replied, cold and robotic. It became my concern when you were still sleeping in my bed while texting her from Mizone. She's the reason for all those late meetings, huh? He stood fast, pushing back his chair. I don't have to justify anything to you. Tess gets it. She believes in the vision. She doesn't nag me about money or beg for attention. I stepped closer. I believed in your vision when it was just a busted laptop and a $3 ramen diet. I believed in you when no one else did. Before he could snap back, the door opened. Rose. In her flawless blowout and designer suit, she swept into the room like she owned the place, making my diner uniform feel 10 times worse just by existing. I thought I heard raised voices, she said sharply, narrowing her eyes at me. Felix, you shouldn't be alone with her. That's why we have attorneys. We? I echoed. Since when are you paying for anything? Rose stepped forward, closing the door behind her. I've always been my son's strongest advocate, she said, voice like poison dipped in honey. Something you clearly failed at. She was just leaving, Felix muttered. Rose placed a hand, manicured and smug, on his shoulder. Darling, this is exactly what I warned you about. The second you hit success, she shows up, demanding things. Demanding? I blinked. I came here hoping for a conversation, for some kind of human decency from my husband. Rose smiled, saccharine and cruel. Ex-husband, or very soon to be. I know, I snapped. The papers showed up while I was tying my apron at work. You know, one of those jobs you two love to pretend isn't real. For a half second, Felix actually looked ashamed. Just a flicker. The timing wasn't intentional, he muttered. Nothing ever is with you, I said.
I turned toward the door, but then stopped. Tell me one thing, Felix. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me? Or was I just the funding source until something shinier came along? His eyes met mine, just for a breath. Then they slipped away. We wanted different things, he said quietly. That's all. Rose exhaled dramatically, like she'd just endured some great tragedy. Such a shame. And somehow, that cut even deeper.
Rose, never one to pass up a final jab, tilted her head and smiled like the devil in pearls. All those years wasted on someone who clearly wasn't your equal, but at least you've upgraded. And as if the universe wanted to twist the knife just a little deeper, Tess appeared in the doorway, right on cue. Her expression shifted the moment she saw me. Confusion, recognition, then that calculated, cool stare, like she'd already replaced me and filed me under obsolete. Sorry to interrupt, she said, all business. The investors are on the line. Felix nodded, relief all over his face. We'll be right there. I looked at the three of them, my husband, his mother, and his mistress, and I felt something snap. Not my heart. That had been fracturing for months, piece by piece. No, this was different. This was the last thread of hope unraveling, the tiny belief that maybe we could still find some shred of respect, of closure, of truth between us. But there was nothing left. Goodbye, Felix, I said softly. I didn't look at Tess, didn't look back. I walked out without another word. That night I sat alone in our sad little apartment, the same place where we'd shared takeout dinners and startup dreams, now echoing with silence. The walls were still lined with photos, us smiling through years of chaos back when I believed in all of it. I took them down, one by one. For 3 days, I moved through life like a ghost, took orders, poured coffee, drove strangers through a city I barely recognized anymore. Grief clawed through me, first disbelief, then sadness so heavy it made my bones ache. But what came next surprised me. Rage, not just at Felix, or Rose, or Tess, at myself, for shrinking, for making myself small enough to fit into the space he offered me, for forgetting that I had worth outside of his world. On the 4th day, I called out of all 3 jobs. Didn't make excuses, didn't explain. I went somewhere that had once made me feel powerful, my old college library, the same place where a younger, sharper Emily Matthews had once mapped out her future in finance, long before Felix Reynolds ever entered the picture. I found my old textbook, flipped to the hollowed-out middle, and pulled out the envelope, the pre-nep from Paris, still sealed, still untouched. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a number a diner regular had scribbled on a napkin months ago. Daniel Tran, a voice answered on the second ring. This is Emily Reynolds, I said, voice steadier than it had been in weeks. I heard you specialize in divorces, especially the kind with hidden assets. I do, he replied. Why don't you tell me your story? So I did. And as I spoke about the jobs, the money, the lies, I felt something start to rebuild inside me. Not revenge, not greed, resolve. This wasn't about taking him down. It was about finally standing up, about reclaiming 7 years of my life that he tried to erase, about no longer fading into the background. Daniel Tran was exactly the kind of lawyer I needed, sharp,
fearless and not the least bit intimidated by Felix's fancy reputation. But his services, they came at a steep price, one that could wipe out the scraps of savings I had left within weeks. "I can offer you a payment plan," Daniel said gently during our second meeting. His tone had softened, just for a moment. "But I won't sugarcoat this. Going up against someone with deep pockets and a top-tier legal team, it's a fight." I leaned back, feeling the burn in my chest. "I've been living in a fight for 7 years," I told him. "I'm not backing down now." When the first court date came, I had already pawned my engagement ring just to cover Daniel's retainer. That little diamond used to feel priceless. Felix had saved months to buy it, but now it was just another thing I gave up for him. I showed up to the courthouse 30 minutes early, dressed in the only business suit I owned. I'd bought it years ago for job interviews, before Felix, before everything. It hung a little loose now. Turns out, years of juggling shifts and skipping meals carves more than just character. Daniel was already waiting outside the courthouse steps, looking like he belonged on a legal drama. Sleek briefcase, focused eyes, walking like he owned the pavement. Next to him, I felt like a bundle of nerves stuffed into clearance rack polyester. "Just stick to what we talked about," he said as we passed through security. "Stay calm. Only answer what's asked. Let me handle the rest." We were the first ones in the courtroom. Daniel said it was strategic. Get in, get settled, shake the jitters. 20 minutes later, the double doors swung open, and Felix made his entrance like it was a fashion show. Tailored suit, probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. He was flanked by 4 attorneys, all carrying matching leather portfolios stamped with the gold logo of Keenan Walsh, one of the most powerful firms in the city. And behind them, Tess, in a navy blue dress that said professional, but whispered, "Don't forget I'm here." Her eyes flicked over to me, then quickly away. Last, of course, was Rose. Her entrance was pure theater. Cream-colored suit, pearl earrings, hair blown out to perfection. She placed a firm, possessive hand on Felix's shoulder as they sat down, strategically placing herself between us like a human wall. Daniel leaned over and muttered, "They're really leaning into the whole production." At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Ruth Mackenzie entered. She was in her 60s, silver hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, and one glance from her could probably melt steel. She sat down and scanned the room with cold efficiency. "Let's skip the theatrics," she said firmly. "We're here for Reynolds versus Reynolds, petition for dissolution of marriage. I've reviewed the initial filings. Mr. Keene, you may proceed." Fred Keene, Felix's lead attorney, senior partner, likely paid more per hour than I made in a week, strode to the podium with the confidence of a man who hadn't heard the word no since law school. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this is a simple matter. My client, Felix Reynolds, CEO of Restock Solutions, is seeking an equitable dissolution of his marriage to Emily Reynolds. He has offered a generous settlement, one that Mrs. Reynolds has, inexplicably, rejected." Daniel stood calmly. "We reject the characterization of generous, Your Honor." He didn't even blink. He said firmly, "My client contributed significantly to the growth and success of Mr. Reynolds' company over the course of their 7-year marriage. The proposed settlement?" He paused. "It barely scratches the surface of what she's rightfully owed." Fred Keene smirked, one of those tight, lawyerly grins that didn't come close to touching his eyes. "Then perhaps we should clarify exactly what Mrs. Reynolds contributed to this so-called success." And that was the signal. What followed was a cold, calculated demolition of my life. My work history was dragged out like laundry and picked apart piece by piece. They called Felix to the stand first, painting him as some genius tech founder who built an empire from nothing but grit, late nights, and brilliance. Then the tone shifted, like a trapdoor opening. "Mr. Reynolds," Keene said, adjusting his cuffs, "what employment did your wife hold during your marriage?" Felix cleared his throat, like he was gearing up for a TED Talk. "Emily worked a variety of service jobs, nothing consistent." "Could you be more specific?" "She waitressed at a local diner," he said, almost apologetically. "Drove rideshare. Did some freelance bookkeeping." "And did she ever hold a formal role within Restock Solutions?" Felix shook his head. "No. She helped a little with the books in the beginning, but we outgrew her skill set pretty quickly." Every word felt like a slap. 7 years of holding that company up like a spine, and now I was being reduced to some background extra with expired skills. Then it was my turn to take the stand. Keene approached with mock sympathy. "Mrs. Reynolds, could you tell the court your current employment status?" I swallowed, steadying my voice. "I currently hold 3 jobs. I work as an administrative assistant at Westbrook Medical during the day. I waitress 4 nights a week, and I drive rideshare on weekends." "And your total income from those positions last year?" My throat tightened. "About $43,000. He raised an eyebrow. "Less than a tenth of your husband's current salary." Then, without pause, "Would you say financial gain played a factor in your decision to marry Mr. Reynolds?" "Objection," Daniel cut in, sharp and fast. "Argumentative and offensive." "Sustained," Judge Ruth said firmly, glaring at Keene. "Counsel will refrain from personal insinuations." But the damage had already sunk in. I could feel it. They were painting the picture. Felix, the brilliant innovator, and me, the underpaid, underqualified, underwhelming woman out for a check. And the questions kept coming, like tiny, deliberate knives. Why did you leave your job at Meridian Financial? Why didn't you pursue more competitive roles? Didn't you choose easier jobs, less demanding ones, on purpose? By the time lunch break rolled around, I was wrecked. I locked myself in the courthouse bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and tried to breathe. "You're doing better than you think," Daniel said when I returned, reading my expression. "The judge sees through this. She's watching you, not just the theatrics." That afternoon, Rose took the stand. Perfectly put together, every word practiced and sharpened. "Mrs. Reynolds," Keene began, "how would you describe your son's marriage?" She adjusted her pearls like she was on stage. "Felix is an extraordinarily generous man. He supported Emily's choices even when they held them back financially. He never pressured her to do more than she wanted." My jaw clenched. The subtext was loud and clear. Felix, the noble, patient husband, and me, the weight around his ankle. "He never pressured her to find more suitable employment," Rose said, with that sickly sweet voice that masked the venom underneath. "And did you observe Mrs. Reynolds contributing to your son's company?" Keene asked, already knowing the answer they wanted. Rose clasped her hands in that practiced, faux sympathetic way. "Not in any meaningful way, no. Felix built that company with sleepless nights and sheer innovation. Emily always seemed content on the sidelines." Her tone suggested I'd spent those years painting my nails and scrolling Instagram while Felix solved world hunger. She kept going, almost gleeful now. She seemed fascinated by the money part, though, always asking about investors and funding, never about the tech. Translation: I was a gold digger who couldn't even spell algorithm. By late afternoon, the courtroom air was thick. Every word, every lie, every dig was suffocating. Judge Ruth finally called for a recess before closing arguments. I turned to Daniel, voice low and urgent. We're not waiting anymore. I want to present the prenup now. He blinked. We agreed to save it for rebuttal. They're burying me, I whispered. I'm not sitting through another hour of this. When we returned to the courtroom, Keene launched into his final monologue, polished like a campaign speech. But before he could wrap up with a bow, Felix cut him off. Your Honor, he said, suddenly standing. May I speak directly? Judge Ruth arched an eyebrow. She didn't love surprises, but she nodded. Felix turned, ever so slightly toward me, angling himself like he was still trying to control the narrative. I built something real, he said, voice loud and self-righteous. I employ 30 people. We help hundreds of small businesses. I did that, not Emily. Then his tone turned cruel. She's only here because of money. She never even worked a real job. Silence.
Gasps. Real, audible gasps. I handed the envelope to Daniel. He walked it to the bench, calm and deliberate. Judge Ruth raised an eyebrow. A prenuptial agreement? She flipped through the pages, scanning quickly. Mr. Keene, were you aware of this document? Keene's mask cracked. His eyes darted to Felix, who now looked like he'd seen a ghost. This is the first we're hearing of any such agreement, Your Honor. We question its authenticity and relevance at this stage. Daniel didn't flinch. It's dated and notarized, 7 years ago. Signed during the couple's honeymoon in Paris. The signature belongs to Mr. Reynolds. We're happy to have it verified. Judge Ruth adjusted her glasses, flipping through the pages with growing interest. This appears to be in order. Mr. Tran, summarize the relevant sections. Of course, Daniel said, voice steady. The document explicitly acknowledges Miss Reynolds' financial contributions to the launch of Restock Solutions. It categorizes them as sweat equity, recognizing her unpaid labor, her multiple jobs, and the money she provided during the company's development. He continued, voice rising above the whispers now erupting across the courtroom. It also confirms that Mrs. Reynolds holds a 49% ownership stake in Restock Solutions and all related intellectual property. Murmurs broke into full-blown commotion. Across the aisle, Felix's face drained of color. He whispered something urgent to Keene, who looked equally panicked. Rose's hand flew to her chest, mouth frozen in silent outrage. And Tess? She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Daniel held steady. Furthermore, the agreement contains a clause that in the event of divorce, Mrs. Reynolds' ownership stake is to be recognized as separate from any other settlement. That courtroom, it was mine now. Judge Ruth brought the room to heel with a single, sharp crack of her gavel. Mr. Reynolds, she said, eyes fixed like lasers on Felix, do you recognize your signature on this document? Felix stood slowly, tugging at the collar of his expensive suit like it was choking him. Your Honor, he began, voice shaky, I may have signed something back in Paris, but I wasn't fully aware of what I was signing. It was our honeymoon. There was champagne. Are you suggesting you were intoxicated when you signed a legal agreement, Mr. Reynolds? Judge Ruth cut in, her tone cool and slicing.
Not intoxicated, exactly, just not fully cognizant of the details. I couldn't hold it in anymore. He was sober enough to pitch to investors that same day, I said clearly, my voice echoing across the courtroom, and he secured our first round of funding right after. Judge Ruth gave a small, thoughtful nod. Mr. Tran, please continue. Daniel stepped forward with quiet fire and started laying it all out. The jobs, the bills, the ramen dinners, the prototype receipts, the server costs, the months I spent doing unpaid bookkeeping while juggling double shifts just to keep the lights on. Mrs. Reynolds didn't just support her husband emotionally, Your Honor. She funded his dream. She worked 3 jobs, took on personal financial risk, and carried the weight of both their lives while he built the infrastructure of Restock Solutions. And for the next 20 minutes, that courtroom transformed. I wasn't the bitter ex-wife chasing a payout anymore. I was the invisible backbone of the empire Felix had tried to claim alone. The woman who had invested years, dollars, and dignity into a partnership, only to be cut out of the picture the moment it became profitable. Judge Ruth leaned forward, listening intently, occasionally shooting sharp questions at both sides. Felix had nothing. His attorneys scrambled. When Daniel rapped, the judge removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose before addressing the room. I'm calling a 30-minute recess to thoroughly review this agreement, she said coolly. When we reconvene, I will issue my preliminary ruling on property division and ownership recognition. Then she fixed her gaze at Felix's team, stone cold. I suggest you use this time to have a serious conversation with your client about a more realistic approach to settlement. The courtroom buzzed as people started to rise. But I just sat there for a moment, grounded, for the first time in years. Daniel gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. That went better than we could have hoped. The judge clearly sees how lopsided this is. I nodded, barely able to breathe, still absorbing the shift in power.
Then Fred Keene approached, noticeably less smug than he had been just hours ago. His confidence had cracked. Mr. Tran, Mrs. Reynolds, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. My client is open to offering a significantly improved settlement if you're willing to discuss terms outside the courtroom. I stared at him, and for a moment, all I could see were the years I spent driving strangers through the city while Felix coded in comfort. The holidays I skipped, the career I shelved, the years of giving and giving and giving for his 49%. No, I said calmly. That's not negotiable. Keene blinked, unsure. But, I continued, I'm open to talking about how we structure our business relationship moving forward. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Ruth didn't waste a single breath on small talk. I've reviewed the prenuptial agreement, she said, voice crisp and absolute. It is valid and binding. Mrs. Reynolds is hereby recognized as owning 49% of Restock Solutions and all associated assets. She locked eyes with Felix over the rim of her glasses. Mr. Reynolds, this court takes a dim view of any attempt to misrepresent marital contributions, especially when hard evidence proves otherwise. Across the aisle, Rose clutched her pearls like they might explode. Tess sat stiff, eyes locked forward, not daring to look at anyone. Felix? He looked old, defeated, like someone who just realized the storm wasn't passing. It had arrived. The judge continued. Given Mrs. Reynolds' substantial ownership in a profitable business, the court finds no need for spousal support. Denied. The parties will proceed to mediation to determine how to manage their joint stake moving forward, or negotiate a buyout of Mrs. Reynolds' share at fair market value. And that was it. It was over. I walked out of that courtroom victorious, vindicated, but weirdly hollow, because no ruling, no dollar amount, no legal document could rewind the years I gave away. No one could hand me back the version of me that believed Felix was worth the cost. Outside, a wall of reporters had already formed, buzzing like flies to a spotlight. Word got out. The tech darling's divorce wasn't so clean after all. Daniel handled the press like a pro, while I stood quietly beside him, heart pounding, still trying to steady myself. "Mrs. Reynolds," one reporter shouted, "how does it feel to be revealed as the hidden partner behind Restock Solutions' success?" Before I could answer, a familiar voice sliced through the crowd. "Emily won't be speaking today," Felix announced, striding down the steps with his entourage. "This is a private matter, and we'll handle it professionally." He tried to look composed, but when our eyes met, for the first time since he spat on everything we'd built, he looked away first. "Actually," I said, turning toward the microphones, "I think I've been silent long enough." The crowd hushed. Even Felix froze mid-step. I took a breath. My voice came out strong, clearer than I expected. Restock Solutions wasn't built by one person. It was built on partnership, on sacrifice, on a shared vision. And whether I stay involved or not, well, that'll depend on how genuine that partnership proves to be from here on out. I didn't wait for questions. I didn't need to. 1 year later, I stood in the window of my new office, downtown, high up, overlooking a city I had once navigated by rideshare shifts and exhaustion. The sunset lit up the skyline, and for the first time in forever, I felt still. After months of negotiations, Felix and I finally reached an agreement. A structured buyout of my 49% stake in Restock Solutions stretched over 5 years to avoid shaking the company to its core. The deal was solid, smart, and it gave me exactly what I needed to build my own future. Matthews Financial Advisors, my firm, my rules. We specialize in helping women entrepreneurs get funded and protected. I'd learned, painfully, how easy it is to be erased from your own legacy if you don't have paperwork, power, and a damn good lawyer. Funny, all those years I spent building someone else's dream gave me a crash course no MBA could buy. There was a soft knock on the door. My assistant stepped in, smiling. "Your 5 o'clock is here. Also, these just came." She placed a bouquet of lilies on my desk with a small envelope. Inside, a note in neat handwriting. "Congratulations on the Forbes feature. You deserve the recognition. C." The magazine had just published their Entrepreneurs to Watch list. I was on it. The article was surprisingly fair. It praised Felix's tech genius, sure, but it also gave credit where it was long overdue. It acknowledged me as the financial engine behind the company's early survival. Finally, the truth had a place in the story. I didn't reply to the note. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They stand better as ruins, quiet reminders of where not to go again. But I kept the flowers. That night, I met up with real friends, the ones who didn't vanish when things got ugly. For the first time in years, I laughed. Not the strained kind, the real kind, from deep down. The weight that had smothered me for so long was gone. I had reclaimed more than ownership, more than dignity, more than my career. I had reclaimed my voice, and this time, no one was going to shut me up.